again to friends from Bingham Call. I hope you continue to enjoy our offering through BBC Bingham. Seems incredible that it is already programme number 7. This week we are doing something just for fun, taking the idea from the TV panel show Would I Lie to You? You will see videos of 10 people from the choir. Each person will tell 3 short stories about themselves. 2 of the stories will be true, 1 of them will be a lie. Your job is to guess or deduce which of each person's stories is the lie. Put your answers on the form below the video links and send it to me by email. I will check all the answer forms and let you know who guessed the most accurately. I'll also let you know the answers so you can marvel at the strange things that happen to people and indeed their ingenious ability to lie. I hope you enjoy this.
Hello everybody, these are my 3 stories. When I was 17, I suppose somewhat unusually and certainly unexpectedly, I found myself in a bathroom with a naked vicar. Not surprisingly, he was shocked, I was shocked, but I'm glad to say that he did see the funny side of it. More importantly, so did his wife. Story 2. As a child, I was mad keen on horses and began to ride at the age of 8. When I was 13, we moved house to an RAF base near a village where there was a racing stables. One of their jockeys lived locally. He had a small stables where he taught lessons. The first time I went, I was over the moon to find out that just weeks earlier he'd almost won the Grand National, coming a close second. But more excitingly, at the end of the lesson, he told me he'd never seen his pony go so well, that I was a very good rider and that I could go down and ride his pony any time I wanted for free. And finally, story 3. My father was in the RAF and we had 2 consecutive postings to RAF Cranwell. At the time, the Red Arrows were based there, and they completely inspired me to want to learn to fly. So I joined the Girls' Venture Scouts and began learning how to glide. And to go solo, you needed to be at least 16 and have completed 40 launches at least. And I'm proud to say that just a few days after my 16th birthday, I did actually manage to go solo.
Hello, fellow members. When I was a young man working in Birmingham, I used to frequent at lunchtime the Birmingham Town Hall where free organ recitals are given by the City of Birmingham organist George Thorburn Ball. On this particular occasion, he was playing the first performance of Tippett's new organ sonata. I took my place and listened with growing horror to the cacophonous sounds emanating from that wonderful instrument. After the performance and during the applause, the gentleman sitting immediately to my right leaned over and said, "What did you think of that?" "Well," I said, "really it is not my cup of tea at all. I thought it was awful." With that, the applause finished, and Thorburn Ball stood up at the podium, turned and waved a hand airily in the direction of the dress circle where I was sitting, and to my horror, the gentleman on my right stood up and acknowledged the applause of the audience. He was Tippett. When I was a young salesman, I once left work at 6 o'clock at night, crossed the road, got in my car, company car, and drove for 3 miles before I realised that it was not my car at all. For the technically minded, it might be important to know that my car was a 1962 3-door Morris Minor painted in that lovely mid-green with cream upholstery, and the car I got into was almost identical. It wasn't until I stopped at traffic lights when I suddenly realised that the briefcase on the rear seat was not mine, that I realised I was driving the wrong car. I had to return it and get my own, fortunately without any repercussions. Some years ago, I was even more overweight than I am at the moment, and I embarked upon a strict regime of dieting to reduce weight, and particularly the size of my waist. One morning, putting on my trousers, I was conscious of the fact that the belt didn't seem to close enough, but as it was the only one I had to put up with it. Unfortunately, while shopping during the morning, I entered a shop and had to reach something from a shelf way above my head, and in doing so, stretching up, embarrassingly, my trousers fell down.
Here is my first story. In my early teaching and conducting career, I used to abuse my voice a lot. Plenty of shouting in the classroom, but more particularly singing all the voice parts loudly over the choir at rehearsals, particularly with my choral society at the time. My voice became very hoarse after a while. Then, after a residential, where a group of staff got together to sight read through a Palestrina Mass, and I sang the whole thing alto falsetto, my voice stopped working altogether. I had nodules on my vocal cords. I had to go to the local hospital to have these removed. The operation was under general anaesthetic, but during it, I woke up. I remember them saying, "He's awake. No, he can't be. Yes, he is," before they put me under again. It took me weeks to recover from the double dose of anaesthetic and 2 or 3 years to get half a decent singing voice back. Story number 2. Towards the end of the 80s, I had a rather good school choir at the 12 to 18 Comprehensive in Camberley, Surrey, where I was head of music. There was a group of 10 sixth formers who formed a vocal group called Echoes, 3 sopranos, 3 altos, 2 tenors and 2 basses. They did lots of concerts and entertainments in school and in the local area. On one occasion, the group was invited to sing after dinner entertainment in the restaurant of the Post Office Tower, or the Telecom Tower, I suppose we should call it now. The 20 punters at the dinner were all people who'd successfully bid for dinner there at a charity auction. BT, who were hosting it, had bought the performance by Echoes at the same auction. So we got to perform at the top of the tower, in the restaurant you may remember that revolves very slowly. And it was at night time. Amazing views of London. And we got to eat the really excellent food that the main dinner guests were being served. The same group also performed in Wookey Hole Caves, Salisbury Cathedral and the Queen Elizabeth Hall. Story number 3. In 1986, I was invited by the Runnymede Church Choirs Association to conduct a Come and Sing Messiah in the chapel of Royal Holloway College, which was also a regular venue for my then choral society, Egham Choral. The event was well attended and relatively high standard as these things go, but it is memorable for something else. At Holloway that week, there had been a biochemistry conference, it turned out, and there were several international delegates. One of these was a man from Australia who was incorporating the conference into a family holiday in the UK. The whole family came along to sing in Messiah, father, mother and 2 teenage daughters. I chatted to the mum and dad during the coffee interval. No mention was made of the fact that the elder daughter was already making her way as an actress on Australian TV. But when she turned up in the TV mini-series Bangkok Hilton the following year, I recognised her straight away. It was Nicole Kidman.
When I was at Sheffield University in the 60s, the Halley Orchestra used to come regularly to give a concert every Friday and the following Saturday and so on, and we used to attend. The cheapest seats were 2 and 6 on a Friday and 3 and 6 on a Saturday if you sat in the choir stalls. Now those choir stalls weren't at all like the ones in the Royal Centre. They were directly behind the orchestra, not lifted up high. Also, there was no barrier between them and the orchestra. One night I was sat directly behind the tubular bells. It was one of those pieces where the percussion is silent for 400, tubular bells are silent for 400 bars, then they go bong bong, and then they're silent for another 400 bars. Much to my surprise, Suddenly, the Tubular Bells player turned round and asked me, would you like a go? Well, I demurred, but he held out the bongers to me. So I climbed down carefully and silently from my seat. He gave me the bongers, and there followed the quickest lesson in how to play the tubular bells in musical history. He counted me in, I bonged and climbed back to my seat carefully and silently. The orchestra continued to the end of the piece, and nobody, I think, noticed. I once sang a bawdy song in Southwell Minster. I sang the song in several other places, but never again in a place of worship. I sang it in the Baltic building in Gateshead at an awards ceremony. The Mayor of Gateshead found it amusing. I sang it at the Royal Agricultural College in Cirencester. I sang it to a crowd of Women's Institute ladies at Denman College in Oxfordshire. I sang it in a Gothic castle in Scotland. I sang it with great trepidation to an audience that included a professor of history. And I sang it in a multitude of village halls, a few pubs and clubs and libraries. I even sang it while sitting on a rock in the Peak District to an audience of 3 friends, augmented by some rather bemused hikers and a couple of sheep, but never to children. Far too bawdy. Whilst at university, I joined the Operatic Society. One year, the production was Iolanthe. I played the part of a fairy in the chorus. One night, I was gossiping in the wings and belatedly realised I'd missed my cue. I shot onto the stage, bearing my wand, which was taller than me, very heavy and made of metal. Centre stage was a rock upon which stood the hero in the midst of an aria. Around the rock was a circle of plastic grass. I overshot my place on the stage, slipped on the plastic grass and crashed into the rock. The wand went clank, clank on the stage. The hero wobbled, lurched manfully, regained his posture and sang on. I wasn't asked again.
Hello everyone. Story 1. Trevor Francis was once heralded as the world's most expensive footballer, with a record-breaking transfer fee of £1 million, when in 1979 he transferred to Nottingham Forest. I used to play football with Trevor Francis when he played for Birmingham City. Back in the 70s, young players were lodged with families as they were away from their own homes. He lodged a few doors away from my grandmother's home in Bordsley Green, Birmingham, a few miles from St Andrews football ground. We, as children, used to play football in the street and on local parkland, and Trevor used to play with us. Story 2. I went through a period of learning to fly. I used to fly out of Sywell Aerodrome in Northampton. At that time, the Northamptonshire Police were evaluating the use of helicopters in policing and had on permanent hire one of the flying school's helicopters, all decked out in police livery and with all the extra equipment added. If needed for police work, a civilian pilot, typically one of the instructors, would pilot with a police spotter. One day when I went for a lesson, the helicopter I was scheduled to pilot was faulty, so we used a police helicopter instead. We were only flying locally and could return quickly in an emergency. On our inbound approach, I had to fly low over the M1 motorway. It was incredible how the traffic slowed when doing this. You could see the cars backing up as we flew over. Story 3. When I was at secondary school, I learned to play the clarinet, but never really enjoyed it. We had a PE teacher named Keith Sandel, who was an excellent guitarist and had been a sessions musician for Dusty Springfield. Keith inspired me to play the guitar, which led me to playing lead guitar in a rock band. I had very long hair, I was much slimmer then, and I'd often do impressions of Mark Bolan. For those of you who don't know who Mark Bolan is, he's the lead singer of T-Rex. Alongside my friend Les Bradford, who did something similar as David Bowie's alter ego, Ziggy Stardust.
I've chosen to do my stories in chronological order. I grew up in Sale, just south of Manchester, and it wasn't uncommon for people from that area to take holidays in North Wales. One year, my parents took us to a holiday camp not far from Criccieth on the Llŷn Peninsula. There was a children's talent contest, of course, which together my younger sister Judy and I entered, encouraged or maybe persuaded by our parents. We sang the Ash Grove, accompanied by Dad on the piano. After a number of other contestants, a girl called Mary, about the same age as Judy, also sang the Ash Grove, but unaccompanied and in Welsh. Well, we came third, but Mary got the first prize. A photograph of the winners lined up on the stage was taken, which my parents kept for many years. Fast forward 7 or 8 years, and we realised that Mary in the photograph was now becoming famous with her record, Those Were the Days, My Friend. That was Mary Hopkin. My second story happened a few years later. As a foreign languages student, you had to spend a year abroad, according to your main foreign language, so mine was spent in Brittany, in Saint-Brieuc. All I can say about the food is that artichokes seem to feature quite a lot. Whilst there, I joined a small local choir. We would sing songs from the 16th century through to the 20th, mainly French, but occasionally in other languages. And in the spring of that year, we went on a very enjoyable residential weekend where we joined many other small choirs from across Brittany. We had rehearsed some pieces in the weeks beforehand, but what came as a shock to the system for me, though it shouldn't have been a surprise really, was that one of the items we had to sight read that weekend was a cantata in Breton. Unseen music and unrecognisable words was a nightmare. Even more surprising is that I came across this music only a few days ago. My third story comes from my time as a teacher. Staff from across the different departments at school often got involved in events such as concerts and musical productions. When a production of Jesus Christ Superstar was put on a year or two before I retired, the main parts were of course played by pupils, with staff in the crowd scenes or with the odd line. To my surprise, I was asked if I would be one of the Soul Girls backing group. After weeks of music rehearsals, we finally got to acting out the scenes and getting our stage positions. It was only at this point that I realised that as one of the 3 Soul Girls, I was going to be in quite a prominent position. Worse was to come when I saw the costumes we were to wear. They were what can only be described as fairly skimpy in bright pink and no modesty for the legs, which were bare. Not the honed, ready for the beach colour, but pasty white. I was only grateful that our prominent position high up was at least not close to the audience.
Unfortunately, Terry does not have the wherewithal to do video himself at home, so I am reading his stories for him. Terry's story number 1. In 1969, while an assistant coach at the European swimming trials at the Crystal Palace in south-east London, I once met Her Majesty the Queen when she made a visit to the poolside as patron of the Amateur Swimming Association. I was one of a team assisting with timekeeping and the training of the swimmers, who were either taking part or had almost qualified for the European Swimming Championships that were scheduled for Barcelona the following year. Story number 2. About 10 years ago, I once sang the national anthem in front of almost 7,000 people at the Nottingham Arena before the final of the ice hockey playoffs. This is an annual weekend event attracting fans of all the clubs, whether playing or not, to a season finale, flooding the hotels in the city each April with all types of hockey shirts. The semi-finals are played on the Saturday and the final, together with the 3rd and 4th place playoff, on the Sunday. The official soloist had taken ill, and after a behind-the-scenes appeal that I overheard, I volunteered to stand in at the last minute and was introduced as a member of the Radcliffe-on-Trent Male Voice Choir. Story number 3. At work on a building site, we used to have 3 resident stray black cats. One day I mistook a lady's hat for one of the cats and tried to chase it out of the office. By the way, I didn't go to Specsavers afterwards. They weren't around then.
Hello. I want to talk about Handel's Messiah. Whilst not my favourite piece, it has played an important part in my life, not least because my dad used to sing it around the house when I was a child. So it was the first choral piece I got to know. So 3 stories from me. The very first time I sang in Messiah was in St George's Hall, Bradford, in 1971, and it was conducted by Sir David Wilcox, no less. He was renowned for his insistence on accurate tuning, and whilst he usually won us over by praise and encouragement and smiling face, there were moments when all was not well. And in rehearsal he would say, "Let's try this. Will those ladies who have had their 40th birthday please stop singing?" Usually that worked because there were enough of us who were under 40. But he also had the gift of being able to detect exactly where the problem lay. So on one occasion, he actually stopped the performance and asked the lady on the 3rd row of the sopranos, second from left, to stop singing. She did, and all proceeded to his satisfaction. Number 2. On Easter Monday in 2001, I sang Messiah in a packed country church in bitterly cold weather with snow on the ground. This was a 13th century monastery church in the Czech Republic, and I was on tour with Leeds Philharmonic Chorus. Normally we ladies wore red concert dresses, but that day we put on as many layers of ordinary clothes as we could muster, including boots, and then the red dress on top. The dress was very voluminous, so that was actually possible. The performance was very well received, to a standing ovation in fact. The audience crowded around us afterwards, thrilled to have visitors from the West. How many British audiences would turn out on a freezing cold Easter Monday to hear a choir from abroad singing in a foreign language? Number 3. On Easter Sunday 2003, I sang Messiah 3 times in one day in 3 different European countries. This was also with Leeds Philharmonic Chorus, and we were based in Budapest. We began the day in Hungary by singing excerpts from Messiah at the 8 o'clock Mass in the church just across the road from the hotel. After breakfast, our coach took us across the border to Slovakia, where we had a rehearsal with the orchestra in Bratislava, and then on to Austria for the full evening performance in Stephan's Dome in the evening. So 3 countries singing Messiah in one day.
When I was a child, we lived in an area of Nottingham made famous in Alan Sillitoe's novel Saturday Night and Sunday Morning, in the shadow of the Valley Cycle Factory. Indeed, my family was slightly acquainted with the Sillitoes. When Carol Rice made his famous 1960 film of the novel, we kids were thrilled to see stars like Albert Finney, Shirley Ann Field and Norman Rossington filming on location in our street. Imagine how excited I was when, coming home from school one day, I was offered the amazing sum of 5 shillings to be an extra in a short scene. All we had to do for this was to hang around and play while Albert Finney, as Arthur Seaton, raced past us, having shot Mrs. Bull with an air rifle. And to prove this, here is a still from the film. That's me on the right, in their short trousers. The camera never lies. Story 2. In my work as an academic, I often visited Finland, and for a time I was chair of one of the research grants committees of the Finnish Academy. On one of these visits, I was invited to an exclusive sauna club on the shores of the Baltic. My host was a fairly well-known left-wing cultural critic, but unknown to me at the time, he was also a member of the Finnish aristocracy, a sort of count, and was very well connected. I discovered this as, sitting naked in one of the saunas, he introduced me to some of the other occupants. This is the Minister for Science and Culture. This is the Minister for Education. This is the former Minister for Transport and Communication. Sweating in the hot gloom, we nodded politely. Occasionally, we would beat each other lightly with birch twigs. In between sessions, we filed outside either to plunge into the Baltic through a hole in the ice or to roll in the snow. I chose the latter. At the end of the evening, still naked, we drank beer and ate sausages in a lounge decorated with photographs of previous distinguished guests. I remember the Duke of Edinburgh, George Bush Sr. and Liberace. Story 3. On another occasion, I was giving the keynote lecture at a conference at the University of Erfurt in Thuringia. Erfurt claims to be both the oldest and the youngest university in Germany, since it was founded in 1379, but only reopened in 1994 after German reunification. Erfurt's most famous alumnus was in fact Martin Luther, who studied here from 1501 to 1505. Most of the delegates were housed in the guest house of the monastery of Erfurt. I was surprised to find that a tradition had been revived that guests of honour, for which I apparently qualified, were accorded the privilege of being accommodated in Luther's own cell. This, however, proved to be an uncomfortable experience. The room was furnished only with a narrow bed, a table, a hard chair, and a crucifix on the wall. It was a bitterly cold January, and though central heating had been installed, it was barely adequate. I shivered there for 3 nights, envying my colleagues in the more modern guest house accommodation.
Would I lie to you? I once canoed backwards down some rapids on the River Wye to show some school kids there was nothing to be afraid of if you remembered your training and kept your nerve. I'd done a lot of canoeing on the Wye as a student, and when I was teaching in Billingshurst, I had the opportunity to take a group of kids on a canoeing holiday in Herefordshire. They'd all done advanced training in the pool, but some of them were very apprehensive when we came to some very minor rapids at Monington Falls. I assured them that they would be fine if they remembered to keep their balance and steered well with their paddles. Then, to show them it was easier than they feared, I set off backwards and successfully negotiated the obstacle, though they were clearly disappointed that I didn't capsize. I should point out that they did it forwards, as per our prior risk assessment. As a young teacher in West Sussex, I once lost control and insulted my head teacher publicly and threatened to kill him. I was trying to organise our parent-teacher-student summer fair as secretary of that committee, and the head was being difficult and obstructive. As he turned away, I muttered, too loudly, that he was a beastly man and I felt like killing him. Unfortunately, there were some kids and parents about who heard this, and so did he, I guess. It was very embarrassing for me for a good long time afterwards. but it did, however, achieve its purpose in removing his opposition when he couldn't fail to hear the response from those nearby. As a student, I once described in his hearing a speech by Neil Kinnock as a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury and signifying nothing. When I was studying at Cardiff University, as an Englishman who liked singing, I became involved in the Intercollege Eisteddfod and began to help with the planning. Cardiff frequently won this contest between us, Swansea, Aberystwyth and Bangor, and so we wanted to put up a good, strong showing. When someone suggested we should get Neil Kinnock to do the English peroration, I remarked to some folks that it would be a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury and signifying nothing, only to realise that he'd come into the room at that moment.
Well, there you are. 30 stories, of which 20 are true. Have a guess as to which is the lie from each person, and then email me the answer form by bedtime on Monday. We will then let you know the winner and the answers next Wednesday. See you next week.